mud, reeds, and the dawn of ingenuity. Imagine a landscape, not of towering cities or bustling metropolises, but of vast, fertile plains nestled between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, a place that, despite its name often evoking images of ziggurats and mighty kings, was truly shaped by the quiet ingenuity of its earliest inhabitants. We often focus on the grand narratives of ancient civilizations, the pyramids of Egypt, the legions of Rome. But the story of Mesopotamia, and indeed much of early human civilization, is also one of humble, unsung inventors whose daily struggles with mud, reeds, and a challenging environment led to innovations that laid the very groundwork for organized society. Consider the very first people who settled in this fertile crescent, perhaps as early as the Ubaid period, around 6500 to 3800 BC. Their immediate concerns were not abstract philosophy or complex mathematics, but the stark realities of survival. How do you grow enough food to feed a growing population in a region prone to both devastating floods and scorching droughts? How do you build shelter that withstands the elements? How do you organize a community when resources are abundant but unpredictable? The answers to these questions were found not in sudden, miraculous leaps of genius, but in countless small, iterative improvements to everyday tools and techniques. Take, for instance, the invention of irrigation. This wasn't a single eureka moment, but a slow, evolving understanding of water management. Early Mesopotamians observed the annual flooding of the rivers, which, while destructive, also deposited rich, fertile silt. They learned to harness this natural phenomenon, digging simple channels and dikes to divert water from the rivers to their fields during dry periods. Imagine the collective effort involved. Hundreds of hands digging, shaping earth with rudimentary shovels made of wood or stone, perhaps even bone. This required a level of communal organization and foresight that was itself revolutionary. It demanded collaboration on an unprecedented scale, transforming disparate family units into cohesive villages and eventually, larger settlements. The fired bricks offered superior durability, resistance to moisture, and allowed for taller, more complex buildings. This shift from sun-dried to fired bricks represents a significant leap in material science, born from countless experiments and an intimate knowledge of local resources. The quiet innovation of the brick allowed for the building of monumental structures, the ziggurats we marvel at today, which were once the beating heart of their spiritual and administrative life. Beyond building, consider the challenges of everyday transport. Hauling heavy loads of grain or building materials across soft, often muddy terrain was incredibly arduous. The invention of the wheel, around 3500 BC, often attributed to the Sumerians, a major Mesopotamian civilization, was another such game changer. Initially, the wheel was likely used not for transport, but for pottery, as a potter's wheel. Imagine the skill required to perfectly center and spin clay on a rotating disc, allowing for symmetrical and more efficient pottery production. This alone transformed the capacity to store food and water, critical for supporting larger populations. The transition from the potter's wheel to the wheeled vehicle was another subtle but monumental step. Early wheels for carts were solid wooden discs, heavy and cumbersome. Attaching them to an axle and then to a platform required a profound understanding of mechanics and balance. Think of the incremental improvements, making the wheel lighter, developing a more efficient axle system, understanding how to yoke animals to pull these new conveyances. This innovation revolutionized trade, allowing goods to be transported over greater distances and in larger quantities, connecting distant communities and facilitating the exchange of ideas and resources. It transformed the pace of life and expanded the known world. The images gradually became more stylized, evolving into cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped marks. The complexity of cuneiform, with hundreds of signs representing words, syllables, and even sounds, required specialized training, giving rise to the profession of the scribe, a highly respected individual who navigated the intricate world of recorded information. The invention of writing, therefore, was a direct response to the boring but essential task of keeping detailed accounts, yet its impact on human history is immeasurable. It allowed for the codification of laws, the transmission of knowledge across generations, and the very concept of documented history. Alongside writing, the need for precise measurement and calculation led to the development of mathematics and systems of weights and measures. How do you ensure fair trade if you don't have standardized units for grain, oil, or precious metals? Mesopotamians developed sophisticated sexagesimal, base, 60, number system, which gave us our 60-second minute, 60-minute hour, and 360-degree circle. Imagine the meticulous process of standardizing weights, perhaps using carefully weighed stones or pieces of metal, and then replicating them across a wide region. This required an understanding of volume, mass, and length, initially driven by practical commerce and construction. Without these standardized units, large-scale trade would have been chaotic and monumental architecture, requiring precise planning and material estimation, would have been impossible. The very concept of equitable exchange and large-scale infrastructure projects rested on these abstract, yet utterly vital, mathematical and metrological innovations. The organization of large-scale projects, such as the construction of massive ziggurats or extensive irrigation networks, also spurred innovations in management and labor organization. These were not individual endeavors, but required the coordinated effort of thousands of workers. The anonymous individuals who contributed to these developments were not always celebrated as inventors in the way we understand the term today. Their contributions were often collective, iterative, and driven by the pressing needs of their daily lives. They were the scribes meticulously scratching signs into clay, the merchants patiently weighing goods, the administrators organizing work gangs, and the observers charting the night sky. Their quiet, persistent ingenuity, rooted in the very fabric of their mundane existence, built the scaffolding upon which all future civilizations would stand. But how did these fundamental innovations, once established, continue to evolve and spread, shaping societies far beyond the Mesopotamian plains, and what lasting impact do their boring origins still have on our modern world? From practical necessity to abstract thought, the quiet revolution ignited by the humble tools and ingenious adaptations of early Mesopotamian life, the mastery of irrigation, the ubiquitous mud brick, the transformative wheel, did not stop at purely practical applications. As these societies grew in complexity, the very necessities of managing surplus resources, organizing labor, and administering burgeoning populations spurred further, more abstract innovations. These seemingly less tangible inventions, born from the need to record, count, and communicate, would prove just as foundational to the development of complex civilization as the physical tools that preceded them. Consider the challenge of managing agricultural surplus. With successful irrigation, communities produced more grain than they could immediately consume. This surplus needed to be stored, accounted for, and distributed. How do you keep track of how much barley has been brought into the communal granary, or how many sheep belong to which family, or how much fear is owed to a particular labor. Early methods likely involved simple tally marks on clay tablets or knots in ropes. But as quantities grew and transactions became more frequent, a more sophisticated system was required. This practical problem, the very bane of ancient accountants, gave birth to one of humanity's most profound inventions, writing. The earliest forms of writing, around 3400 to 3300 BCE in Sumer, southern Mesopotamia, were not poetic verses or historical chronicles, but rather pictograms and ideograms used for administrative and economic record-keeping. Imagine a scribe, perhaps in a temple granary, pressing a reed stylus into soft clay to depict a head of barley and a number of jars, meticulously recording grain disbursements. This was not about expressing complex ideas, but about documenting transactions. Someone had to plan the logistics, allocate resources, and supervise the labor. This led to the development of early bureaucratic structures, with hierarchies of supervisors and detailed work schedules. Imagine the complexity of feeding, housing, and directing a workforce of thousands to dig a new canal system over many months, coordinating different teams, ensuring tools were available, and managing supplies. This required a level of foresight and organizational skill that prefigures modern project management. The boring details of managing ancient workforces laid the foundation for complex administrative systems that would govern empires for millennia. Even seemingly simple concepts like the calendar became profoundly important. For an agrarian society utterly dependent on seasonal cycles, knowing when to plant, when to expect floods, and when to harvest was a matter of life and death. Mesopotamian astronomers, observing the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, developed a sophisticated lunisolar calendar, aligning lunar cycles with the solar year to predict seasonal changes. This was not idle stargazing. It was a pragmatic necessity, guiding the rhythm of agricultural life and ensuring survival. Imagine the collective anxiety of an entire village waiting for the sign to plant, relying on the careful observations of a few learned individuals. This astronomical knowledge, born of practical agricultural needs, also laid the groundwork for later scientific inquiry into the cosmos. These abstract inventions, writing, mathematics, standardized weights, and organized labor, were not born in a vacuum. They were direct responses to the challenges and opportunities presented by the more tangible innovations of irrigation, mud brick, and the wheel. The ability to produce a surplus of food necessitated a way to record it. The need to build larger structures demanded precise measurement and coordinated effort. The growth of trade required standardized exchange. Their solutions, born of necessity and refined through countless iterations, created a ripple effect that extends across continents and millennia, fundamentally structuring the world we inhabit today. The echoes of those first scribes scratching on clay tablets and those early farmers diverting river water can still be heard in the digital whispers of our information age and the complex infrastructure of our globalized world. What other seemingly insignificant human actions, repeated countless times over generations, might have inadvertently shaped the destiny of entire civilizations? Even the humble wheel, first applied to pottery and then to vehicles, underwent continuous evolution. From solid wooden discs, it evolved into spoked wheels, making them lighter and faster, crucial for chariots and more efficient carts. The principle of the rotating axle and wheel allowed for the development of countless machines, from watermills and windmills to spinning wheels and gears, all of which were crucial for the industrial revolutions that would follow thousands of years later. Every time you see a car, a bicycle, or even a simple pulley, you are witnessing the enduring legacy of an invention conceived in the muddy plains of ancient Sumer. The very concept of rotational motion for practical application, refined over millennia, traces its roots back to those unassuming first wheels. The slow, incremental, and often anonymous innovations of the ancient Mesopotamians were not flashy or heroic. They were rooted in the everyday struggles of survival, the need to feed more mouths, build better shelters, and manage increasingly complex societies. Yet, it was precisely this practical, problem-solving approach that led to breakthroughs of monumental, lasting importance. They created the conceptual tools, writing and mathematics, that allowed knowledge to accumulate and complex thought to flourish. They developed the organizational structures that enabled societies to scale. And they engineered the fundamental technologies like the wheel and irrigation that transformed human capacity to interact with and control their environment. The sexagesimal base 60 number system developed by the Mesopotamians, born from their administrative needs, also proved remarkably resilient and influential. While decimal base 10 systems are prevalent today, the Mesopotamian legacy lives on in fundamental ways. Think about our measurement of time: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. This isn't an arbitrary choice. It's a direct inheritance from Babylonian mathematics. When we divide a circle into 360 degrees, we are using another direct descendant of their system. This base 60 system was exceptionally useful for fractions, as 60 is divisible by many numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, making calculations involving division and multiplication remarkably straightforward for ancient accountants and astronomers. The quiet mathematical insights of these early scribes continue to structure our daily lives, from the turning of a clock hand to the navigation of a ship or an airplane. The principles of organized labor and bureaucratic administration, refined in the vast public works and temple economies of Mesopotamia, also proved highly transferable. The need to manage thousands of workers for irrigation projects, temple construction, or military campaigns necessitated hierarchical structures, task allocation, and detailed record-keeping. These rudimentary forms of management laid the groundwork for the complex bureaucracies that would govern empires for millennia, from the ancient Egyptians and Persians to the Roman Empire and beyond. Every modern corporation, every government agency, with its divisions, departments, and chain of command, owes a conceptual debt to these early Mesopotamian attempts to coordinate human effort on an unprecedented scale. The boring details of ancient workforce management were, in fact, the nascent seeds of modern organizational theory. Imagine, if you will, the early medieval landscape of Europe, a mosaic of scattered settlements, vast forests, and rough, untamed land. Amidst this often chaotic backdrop, a unique institution began to flourish, one that would become an unexpected crucible of innovation and a silent engine of progress: the monastery. Far from being mere retreats for pious contemplation, these self-sufficient communities, often isolated and austere, became centers of agricultural development, technological advancement, and the preservation of knowledge, all driven by a daily rhythm of work and prayer known as ora et labora, pray and work. Step into a Benedictine monastery in, say, 9th century Francia. The day would begin before dawn, with the monks rising for matins, the first of the 7 canonical hours of prayer. But the rest of their waking hours were meticulously structured, not just around spiritual duties, but around the demanding realities of maintaining a large, self-sustaining community. Unlike the scattered, often struggling peasant farms, monasteries operated with a degree of organization and foresight that was truly revolutionary for their time. The monastic rule, particularly the rule of Saint Benedict, emphasized manual labor as a spiritual discipline. This wasn't merely about subsistence. It was about purposeful work, viewed as a way to glorify God and contribute to the community's well-being. Monks were not just scholars. They were also farmers, craftsmen, scribes, and administrators. This holistic approach to communal living meant that monasteries often became bastions of practical knowledge and agricultural expertise in an age where such skills were often rudimentary elsewhere. Their agricultural practices were often remarkably advanced for the era. While the surrounding peasants might practice basic subsistence farming, monasteries frequently adopted and refined techniques that improved yields and sustained larger populations. They were pioneers in drainage systems, transforming marshy lands into fertile fields. Imagine monks, clad in their humble robes, tirelessly digging ditches and building rudimentary channels to draw excess water away from soggy ground. This was backbreaking work, but it yielded valuable arable land that could support the monastery and generate surplus for trade or charity. Monasteries were also at the forefront of crop rotation, understanding, often empirically, the benefits of varying crops in different years to maintain soil fertility. While the widespread adoption of the three-field system came later, monastic communities often experimented with similar methods long before they became common practice outside their walls. They cultivated a wide variety of grains, legumes, and vegetables, ensuring a diverse and resilient food supply. Their gardens were not just for sustenance. They were often meticulously organized, serving as living laboratories for medicinal herbs and new horticultural techniques. Imagine the quiet precision of a monastic gardener, tending to rows of herbs, each with its specific properties known through centuries of observation and trial. Beyond the fields, monastic self-sufficiency extended to sophisticated animal husbandry. Monasteries often maintained large herds of cattle, sheep, and pigs, providing meat, milk, wool, and valuable manure for fertilizer. They were early practitioners of selective breeding, aiming for healthier, more productive animals. The care of these animals was another daily chore, from pasturing and milking to shearing and butchering. This hands-on engagement with animal welfare ensured a steady supply of resources and contributed to the overall health of the monastic economy. Water management was another area of monastic expertise. While we've already touched on irrigation in Mesopotamia, medieval monasteries often developed sophisticated water mills and fish ponds. Water mills, powered by flowing rivers, were a technological marvel of the age. They mechanized processes previously done by hand, such as grinding grain into flour, fulling cloth, or even sharpening tools. Imagine the rhythmic thrum of a large water wheel, turning gears within the mill, liberating human labor for other tasks. Fish ponds, meticulously constructed and maintained, provided a reliable source of protein, especially important during periods of fasting in the Christian calendar. These were not simply holes in the ground. They were engineered aquatic ecosystems designed to optimize fish growth and harvesting. The very layout of a monastery reflected this emphasis on practical organization. Beyond the church, dormitories, and refectory, there would be workshops for carpentry, smithing, tanning, and brewing. The infirmary often had its own herb garden, reflecting a deep engagement with medicine and healing. The scriptorium, of course, was where books were copied and preserved, a critical function in an age of widespread illiteracy. Each part of the monastic complex served a specific, functional purpose, contributing to the community's autonomy and productivity. The monks' long-term perspective and collective ownership, unlike the often fragmented landholdings of peasants or the short-term interests of individual lords, allowed them to invest in infrastructure projects that yielded benefits over decades, even centuries. They built roads, bridges, and canals, not just for their own use, but often benefiting the wider region. Their commitment to improvement was not driven by personal profit, but by the spiritual goal of creating a self-sustaining community that could dedicate itself to prayer and scholarly pursuits. In a world where knowledge was often localized and slowly disseminated, monasteries acted as silent repositories and incubators of practical wisdom. They observed, experimented, recorded, and refined techniques that, when eventually shared or adopted by others, incrementally pushed forward the boundaries of agricultural and technological capability. Their quiet, methodical work, often undertaken with humble tools and immense patience, was subtly transforming the landscape and laying the groundwork for future advancements. But how did this emphasis on practical innovation within the secluded walls of monasteries extend beyond agriculture, leading to unexpected advancements in areas like industry and the very structure of daily life? Monks traveling between different abbeys also facilitated the exchange of ideas and best practices. Thus, successful innovations in drainage, mill technology, or brewing methods developed in one monastery could gradually spread across vast regions, contributing to a generalized rise in practical knowledge and productivity across Europe. Their network was a slow but steady conduit for technological transfer. The enduring influence of these medieval monastic workshops highlights a crucial aspect of technological history, that innovation is not always a product of grand scientific theory or singular genius, but often arises from the persistent, practical efforts of communities seeking self-sufficiency and efficiency. The quiet whir of the monastic watermill, the steady clinking from the forge, and the meticulous process of brewing were not just daily chores. They were the subtle yet powerful echoes of an impending industrial age, carefully cultivated within the spiritual heart of medieval Europe. But how did these secluded bastions of practical knowledge also become the unlikely guardians of the very intellectual heritage of Western civilization, a role that extended far beyond the realm of practical tools and industrial processes? The impact of medieval monasteries extended far beyond their meticulously cultivated fields and disciplined agricultural practices. Within their cloistered walls and bustling workshops, a silent revolution in early industrial processes was underway, driven by the same principles of efficiency, self-sufficiency, and innovation that characterized their farming. These monastic communities, often seen purely as spiritual havens, were, in fact, unwitting pioneers of rudimentary factory systems and technological application that would prefigure the later Industrial Revolution by centuries. One of the most remarkable examples of monastic industrial acumen was their extensive use and refinement of water power. While watermills had existed in rudimentary forms since Roman times, it was in the medieval monasteries, particularly those of the Cistercian order, that their application truly blossomed. These monks took the basic concept and pushed its boundaries, often constructing complex systems of dams, sluices, and canals to harness water flow for a variety of tasks beyond simply grinding grain. Imagine a large Cistercian abbey, perhaps in rural France or England, in the 12th or 13th century. A central stream or river might be diverted, its energy channeled to power multiple mills for different purposes. There would be the ubiquitous grain mill, converting wheat and barley into flour for the monastic community and for sale. But often, there were also fulling mills, a crucial innovation for the nascent textile industry. Fulling involved cleaning and thickening woven wool fabric by beating it in water, a process previously done manually by trampling. The water-powered fulling mill, with its large wooden hammers driven by the mill's axle, drastically reduced the labor involved, making wool production more efficient and the resulting cloth of higher quality. Beyond these larger-scale operations, monastic workshops were hives of specialized craftsmanship. The smithies produced not just agricultural tools, but also hinges, locks, and components for more complex machinery. The carpentry shops built everything from furniture and monastic buildings to the intricate wooden gears for their mills. The sheer variety of skills concentrated within a single monastic community was extraordinary, creating an environment ripe for cross-pollination of ideas and incremental improvements in various trades. A monk working in the scriptorium might also be a skilled bookbinder, and the abbot might possess a deep understanding of hydraulic engineering from overseeing the construction of a new mill. The very organization of monastic labor also contained the seeds of later industrial efficiency. Monks lived by a strict timetable, with specific hours allocated to different tasks. This regimentation, though driven by spiritual discipline, created a highly structured and productive workforce. The clear hierarchy within the monastery, from the abbot to the prior and the various obedientiaries, monks in charge of specific departments like the cellar, sacristan, or infirmarian, ensured efficient management of resources and labor. This systematic approach to work, coupled with a long-term vision, allowed monasteries to undertake and complete projects of a scale and complexity rarely seen outside royal or aristocratic domains. They essentially functioned as tightly run, vertically integrated economic units, anticipating aspects of modern corporate organization. Furthermore, the monasteries played a crucial, often overlooked, role in the diffusion of knowledge and technology. As new monastic foundations were established, often in remote or undeveloped areas, they brought with them the accumulated agricultural and industrial expertise from the mother house. Beyond textiles, water power was adapted for sawmills, speeding up the production of timber for construction and even tanning mills, simplifying the arduous process of preparing leather. Some monasteries even experimented with using water power for forge bellows, enhancing metalworking capabilities. This widespread adoption and continuous improvement of water-powered machinery demonstrate a pragmatic approach to technology, driven by the desire to reduce manual labor and increase output for the benefit of the community. It wasn't about profit maximization in a modern sense, but about optimizing resources for self-sufficiency and charitable endeavors. The monastic commitment to brewing and winemaking also fostered significant innovation. These were not just beverages. They were vital foodstuffs, sources of safe hydration in an era of often impure water and marketable commodities. Monasteries developed sophisticated techniques for fermentation, storage, and quality control. Imagine a monk in the monastic brewery, carefully monitoring temperatures, understanding the properties of different yeasts, and perfecting recipes passed down through generations. Their precision, often rooted in empirical observation, led to improvements in these processes that were far ahead of their time, contributing to the development of early chemical and biological understanding. Many renowned European beer and wine traditions can trace their origins directly back to monastic ingenuity. Furthermore, Monasteries often provided the only formal education available outside the very highest echelons of society. Young boys, destined for a monastic life or perhaps for service in the church or royal court, would receive instruction in Latin, grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, and music. This basic but crucial education kept the flame of literacy and intellectual inquiry alive during centuries when formal schooling was scarce. The intellectual capital fostered within these monastic schools would eventually contribute to the blossoming of cathedral schools and, later, the first universities. The monastic commitment to preserving knowledge was not accidental. It stemmed from the belief that knowledge, both sacred and secular, was a gift from God and that its preservation was a moral and spiritual duty. The Benedictine rule, with its emphasis on stability and the value of intellectual pursuits, provided the framework for these communities to become islands of order and learning in a turbulent world. They saw themselves as continuators of a sacred tradition, connecting the wisdom of the past with the unfolding present. The influence of these scholarly activities was far-reaching. By preserving classical texts, monasteries ensured that the philosophical and scientific achievements of Greece and Rome were not entirely forgotten, providing a crucial foundation for the later Renaissance. By developing and maintaining sophisticated copying techniques, they laid the groundwork for the more efficient dissemination of knowledge. By educating generations of scholars and administrators, they contributed to the intellectual infrastructure of medieval Europe. The quiet rustle of parchment and the methodical scratch of the quill were, in their own way, shaping the intellectual landscape of a continent. The unsung heroes of the scriptorium, sitting silently in their chilly rooms, patiently transcribing the words of long-dead thinkers, were weaving the very fabric of intellectual continuity. Their dedication, often without personal recognition or glory, ensured that the light of learning flickered, rather than extinguishing completely, through centuries of immense change. Their legacy is evident every time we consult a historical document, read a classical text, or appreciate the intricate beauty of an illuminated manuscript. The monk's silent labor in the scriptorium reminds us that the preservation and transmission of knowledge are as vital to civilization's progress as any grand invention or military victory. What other overlooked human activities, seemingly mundane in their execution, have had such profound and lasting impacts on the trajectory of human intellectual development? Custodians of the written word and the light of learning. While medieval monasteries were undeniably centers of agricultural and technological innovation, their most profound and enduring contribution to Western civilization lies in their quiet, tireless role as the custodians of the written word and the light of learning during a period often misleadingly termed the Dark Ages. In an era of widespread illiteracy, fragmented political structures, and the decline of urban centers that had once fostered scholarship, the monastic scriptorium became an unlikely, yet indispensable, sanctuary for knowledge, preserving the intellectual heritage of antiquity and laying the groundwork for future intellectual awakenings. Imagine the scriptorium, the monastic writing room, often a quiet, cold space, sometimes heated only by a central brazier to prevent the ink from freezing in winter. Here, monks, known as scribes or copyists, would spend countless hours, often in stooped postures, meticulously copying texts by hand. This was not a quick or easy task. Each page required immense concentration, perfect penmanship, and an unwavering eye for detail. The tools were simple: quills made from goose or swan feathers, ink made from soot, gall nuts or plant dyes, and parchment or vellum, treated animal skins, as the writing surface. The faint scratching of quills on parchment would be the dominant sound, a testament to the patient dedication to the preservation of ideas. The sheer volume of work was staggering. A single large book, like a Bible or a commentary on a classical text, could take months, even years, to complete. Monks would copy not only religious texts, Bibles, liturgical books, patristic writings, but also invaluable classical Greek and Roman works of philosophy, history, medicine, mathematics, and rhetoric. The typical bathing sequence was a carefully orchestrated journey through different temperatures and atmospheric conditions. You wouldn't simply jump into a tub. Upon arrival, you would first enter the apoditerium, the changing room. Imagine the chatter and bustling activity here. Slaves or attendants helping patrons shed their outer garments, placing them in niches or on shelves. This was often a place where valuables were stored, sometimes leading to theft, as indicated by numerous ancient laments about stolen clothes and rings. From the apoditerium, the bather would typically move to the palestra, an open-air exercise yard. This was where the health club aspect came into play. Romans, particularly men, would engage in light exercise before bathing, wrestling, ball games, or simply stretching. Imagine the sounds of grunts, shouts, and the thud of bare feet on packed earth, a stark contrast to the quietude of the bathing halls themselves. This pre-bathing exercise was believed to stimulate circulation and open the pores, preparing the body for the cleansing ritual to come. Next, it was on to the heated rooms. The first stop was usually the tepidarium, a warm, mildly heated room. This served as a gentle transition zone, allowing the body to acclimatize to the increasing temperatures. Imagine the sensation of warm air enveloping you, slowly relaxing your muscles. The walls would often be decorated with frescoes, and the light would be soft, filtering in through high windows. This was a place for leisurely conversation, for catching up with friends, or simply for quiet contemplation. From the tepidarium, the bather would progress to the caldarium, the hot room. This was the steamiest and most humid part of the baths, designed to induce profuse sweating and open the pores completely. Imagine the thick, moist air, the glistening walls, and the visible vapor hanging heavy in the atmosphere. The caldarium often featured a large, hot water bath, sometimes a plunge pool, where bathers would immerse themselves. This intense heat was believed to draw out impurities and invigorate the body. Scrapers, known as strigils, would be used here. After sweating, bathers would cover themselves with olive oil, then use the strigil to scrape off the oil, sweat, and dirt. This was not a delicate process. It was a vigorous scraping, often done by a slave or an attendant. Imagine the distinct sound of metal scraping against skin, followed by the sight of accumulated grime being removed. Finally, after the intense heat, came the refreshing coolness of the frigidarium, the cold plunge bath. This was a bracing shock to the system, designed to close the pores, invigorate the senses, and complete the cleansing process. Imagine the gasp as you plunged into the cool water, a stark contrast to the preceding heat. This rapid temperature change was believed to be highly beneficial for health and circulation. Some bathhouses even had large, open-air cold swimming pools, natations, for more extensive cooling and exercise. The Roman bathhouse, therefore, was a sophisticated environment, meticulously designed for a specific sequence of activities. It catered not just to physical cleanliness, but to social interaction, physical exercise, and mental relaxation. It was a place where all free classes of Roman society, from senators to artisans, could mingle, at least within their respective gendered sections, though some bathhouses were mixed or had specific mixed hours. This daily ritual was deeply embedded in their cultural fabric, a testament to the Roman appreciation for both practical hygiene and the pleasures of communal life. But beyond the simple act of bathing, what were the deeper social dynamics at play within these steamy halls? What did Romans actually do in the baths, and how did these everyday routines reflect the broader values and anxieties of their society? The peculiar pleasures of a Roman bathhouse. More than just a wash. Section 1. the daily ritual of steam and socializing. Imagine stepping back in time, not to the clamor of the Roman Forum or the solemnity of a temple, but to a place designed for relaxation, hygiene, and vibrant social interaction, a Roman bathhouse. This wasn't merely a place to get clean. It was the ancient equivalent of a community center, a health club, a spa, and even a casual business meeting space, all rolled into one. For the average Roman, visiting the public baths was not a luxury but a daily ritual, as ingrained in their routine as our morning coffee or evening news. Its peculiar pleasures and complex social dynamics offer a fascinating, often overlooked, glimpse into the rhythms of daily Roman life. Consider the sheer scale and architectural ambition of these structures. Even in a moderately sized Roman town, the baths would be one of the most imposing buildings, second only perhaps to the basilica or a major temple. In Rome itself, the imperial baths, like those of Caracalla or Diocletian, were truly colossal, sprawling complexes that could accommodate thousands of bathers simultaneously. Imagine the engineering required to supply, heat, and manage the vast quantities of water needed for these establishments, all without the aid of modern pumps or filtration systems. Aqueducts, those magnificent feats of Roman engineering, channeled fresh water from distant springs and rivers directly to the baths, a constant flow ensuring cleanliness and abundance that circulated beneath the floors and through the walls. This unseen labor was crucial to the operation of every bathhouse, providing the luxurious warmth that patrons enjoyed above. The logistics of supplying fuel, maintaining the complex plumbing, and ensuring hygiene for thousands of daily visitors highlight a remarkable level of civic organization and engineering prowess. The financial model of the baths also varied. While some were privately owned and charged a fee, many public baths were built and maintained by wealthy citizens or emperors as a form of patronage, offering cheap or even free access to the populace. This act of public munificence, was a key way for the elite to gain popular favor and display their wealth and commitment to the common good. Imagine the political currency gained by an emperor who provided a magnificent new bath complex for the people of Rome. The accessibility of the baths, therefore, was not just about hygiene. It was a fundamental aspect of Roman social policy and civic pride. The daily ritual of visiting the baths reveals a society that valued communal interaction, physical well-being, and a certain degree of hedonism. It was a place where Romans could escape the pressures of work and domestic life, unwind, and participate in the vibrant public sphere. The sounds, the smells, the heat, and the constant flow of people created a sensory experience that was integral to their urban existence. But as the Roman Empire began its long decline, what happened to these magnificent structures, these hubs of daily life? How did the peculiar pleasure of the Roman bathhouse eventually fade from common practice, leaving behind only architectural ghosts and a silent legacy? Section 3. The slow decay and the lingering echoes. The peculiar pleasures and monumental scale of the Roman bathhouse, once integral to the fabric of daily life across the empire, did not vanish abruptly. Instead, their decline was a slow, multifaceted process, mirroring the gradual unraveling of the Roman Empire itself. The story of their demise, and the lingering echoes of their influence, offers a quiet reflection on the fragility of infrastructure and the shifting tides of cultural values. One of the primary factors in the bath's decline was the deterioration of infrastructure, particularly the intricate network of aqueducts that supplied them with vast quantities of fresh water. As the Roman Empire faced increasing economic strain, political instability, and external pressures, the resources and centralized organization required to maintain these colossal public works dwindled. Imagine the pipes cracking, the channels silting up, the arches crumbling, each breach limiting the flow of vital water, turning magnificent complexes into stagnant ruins. Without a consistent and abundant supply of clean water, the very purpose of the baths was compromised. The sophisticated hypo-cost heating systems, too, required immense amounts of fuel and skilled labor to operate. As resources became scarce and populations dispersed, maintaining these complex furnaces became unsustainable. The fragmentation of Roman political authority also played a significant role. The centralized imperial power that had often funded and managed the grand public baths began to wane. Local authorities, increasingly focused on immediate defense and survival, lacked the resources or the incentive to maintain these expensive civic amenities. Without the patronage of emperors or wealthy citizens, many bathhouses fell into disrepair, becoming neglected husks of their former glory. This shift reflects a broader decline in urbanism and public spending that characterized the late Roman and early medieval periods. Changing cultural and religious values also contributed to the decline. With the rise of Christianity as the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, attitudes towards public nudity and communal bathing began to shift. While early Christians initially tolerated or even engaged in bathing, the increasingly ascetic leanings of the Church, combined with growing concerns about immorality and promiscuity in mixed-gender bathing, which was sometimes practiced, led to a disapproval of public bathhouses. The emphasis shifted from communal physical cleanliness to spiritual purity. This subtle but powerful cultural transformation gradually undermined the social acceptance and enthusiasm for the very concept of the public bath. The decline in population and urbanization further exacerbated the issue. As the Roman Empire contracted, cities shrank and populations became more dispersed, especially in the Western Empire. Fewer people meant less demand for large public amenities, and the concentrated populations necessary to make grand bathhouses economically viable simply vanished in many areas. The vibrant urban life that had once sustained the baths gave way to a more rural, agrarian existence, where private, simpler forms of hygiene became the norm. By the early medieval period, many of the grand Roman bathhouses lay in ruins, their magnificent arches and vaulted ceilings collapsing, their marble adornments stripped away for other buildings or for lime. Some were converted into churches, fortifications, or even served as quarries for building materials. Their purpose, once so central to Roman daily life, had largely been forgotten or reinterpreted. However, the legacy of the Roman bathhouse did not entirely disappear. Its echoes lingered in various forms. The very engineering principles behind the aqueducts and the hypocaust system continued to influence later architectural and heating technologies, even if on a smaller scale. Medieval monasteries, for instance, sometimes incorporated advanced plumbing and heating systems that bore a distant resemblance to Roman ingenuity, albeit adapted for different purposes. More profoundly, the concept of hygiene and personal well-being, though evolving, continued to hold importance. While communal public baths of the Roman type faded in the West, private bathing traditions persisted. In the Byzantine East and in the Islamic world, the tradition of public baths, like the Turkish hammam, directly inherited and adapted the Roman model, keeping the spirit of communal cleansing and relaxation alive for centuries. These Eastern bathhouses, often with their distinct architectural styles and social customs, are a direct continuation of a practice whose roots lie in ancient Rome. Even in the West, during periods like the Renaissance, there was a renewed interest in classical Roman practices, including a nostalgic appreciation for the grandiosity of their baths, though comprehensive recreation was rare. Modern spas and health clubs, with their distinct zones for hot and cold, exercise and relaxation, can be seen as distant, perhaps unwitting, descendants of the Roman bathing complex, inheriting the fundamental idea of a dedicated space for physical and social rejuvenation. The ultimate demise of the Roman bathhouse serves as a poignant reminder that even the most enduring and seemingly indispensable aspects of a civilization can fade when the underlying societal, economic, and cultural conditions that support them no longer exist. The silence that fell over these once bustling spaces, replaced by crumbling stone and whispering winds, tells a story not of failure, but of a profound transformation, leaving behind
the rhythmic
only the
heartbeat
ghostly
of an
grandeur of a
age.
forgotten daily
In
ritual.
the hushed,
What other
dust-moated workshops
ubiquitous
of
aspects of
18th
past
century
civilizations
Europe,
once
An
thought
invisible
eternal,
revolution was unfolding,
leaving only
driven by the
enigmatic traces
meticulous
and a
hands
lingering
and
sense of
quiet
their former
determination
significance.
of master clockmakers. Imagine, if you will, stepping through a doorway into one such sanctuary, perhaps in the bustling heart of London's Clerkenwell, or the winding streets of Geneva, or the precise, methodical environs of Augsburg. The air would be thick with the faint scent of oil, brass filings, and polished wood, punctuated only by the rhythmic tick-tock of dozens of mechanisms in various states of completion. This wasn't the clangor of a blacksmith's forge or the hurried chatter of a marketplace. This was a realm of focused concentration, where every movement was deliberate, every measurement exact, and every second held profound importance. Before the widespread adoption of affordable personal timepieces, the very concept of time was far more fluid, more organic. Life was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun, the tolling of church bells, and the general consensus of the community. But as the Enlightenment gathered pace, as trade expanded, and as the burgeoning scientific method demanded ever greater precision, the need for accurate timekeeping became not merely a convenience, but a foundational necessity. It was in this crucible of evolving societal demands that the 18th century clockmaker emerged as a silent titan, a figure whose quiet dedication reshaped the very fabric of daily existence. Consider the apprentice, perhaps a boy of 12 or 13, swept into this world of intricate gears and delicate springs. His first tasks would be humble, cleaning brass plates, polishing tiny screws, perhaps fetching tools for the master. He would learn patience, a virtue cultivated through hours of repetitive, exacting work. He'd observe the master's hands, calloused yet nimble, manipulating components smaller than a fingernail with practiced ease. The apprentice was learning not just a trade, but a philosophy, a respect for precision, for the unseen forces that govern the mechanical ballet within a clock's casing. Each part, no matter how tiny, had a specific role to play in the grand symphony of time. A single misplaced pivot, a slightly imperfect tooth on a gear, could throw the entire mechanism into disarray. The stakes, while seemingly small, were immense for the reputation and livelihood of the workshop. The materials themselves were chosen with utmost care. Brass, for its workability and resistance to corrosion, formed the plates and wheels. Steel, hardened and tempered, became the springs and escapements, the very heart of the timekeeping mechanism. Rubies, tiny and almost imperceptible, were sometimes used as bearings in high-end watches, reducing friction to an absolute minimum and extending the life of the delicate movements. Imagine the sheer difficulty of working with such minute components, often under the flickering light of a candle or a whale oil lamp, long before the advent of electric illumination or magnified optics readily available today. The clockmaker's eyes, even more than their hands, were their most valuable tools, trained to spot imperfections invisible to the untrained gaze. The tools of the trade were, in themselves, works of art and precision. Tiny files, each shaped for a specific contour. Lathes, some hand-cranked, others powered by foot pedals, capable of turning brass rods into perfectly cylindrical arbors. Gravers, sharpened to razor-fine points, for engraving intricate designs or numbering dials. Then there was the escapement tool, a marvel of ingenuity designed to precisely cut the teeth of the escape wheel, the critical component that regulated the release of power from the mainspring, dictating the very tick-tock of the clock. This was where the clockmaker's skill truly shone. An escapement that was even slightly off would result in an inaccurate timepiece, a silent condemnation of the craftsman's ability. The 18th century saw significant advancements in horology, building upon centuries of cumulative knowledge. This was the era of figures like George Graham, who perfected the deadbeat escapement, drastically improving the accuracy of pendulum clocks by reducing recoil. It was also the century of John Harrison, a largely self-taught carpenter who tackled the monumental problem of longitude at sea, an endeavor that earned him a significant parliamentary prize and, arguably, saved countless lives. Harrison's marine chronometers were mechanical marvels, designed to keep accurate time even on the pitching and rolling decks of a ship, a task previously deemed impossible. His story, while famous, often overshadows the thousands of anonymous clockmakers whose daily toil laid the groundwork for such breakthroughs. They were the unsung heroes of precision, the foot soldiers in the war against imprecision. Consider the complexity of a single long case clock, often referred to as a grandfather clock. It wasn't merely a mechanism. It was a piece of furniture, a status symbol, and a testament to the owner's prosperity and modernity. The wooden cases, often crafted from mahogany, oak, or walnut, were themselves masterpieces of carpentry, adorned with intricate carvings, veneers, and sometimes even painted scenes. The brass dials were hand-engraved, often featuring elaborate spandrels and elegant script for the numerals. Each component, from the weights that provided power to the pendulum that governed the beat, was carefully calculated and precisely executed. The act of constructing a clock began long before any gears were cut. It started with meticulous design, often sketched out on paper, followed by the careful selection of raw materials. The brass plates, perhaps arrived from a local foundry, would need to be cut, filed, and drilled to precise specifications. The wheel blanks, then cut into circles, would have their teeth meticulously formed, often by hand or with simple, yet ingenious, wheel-cutting engines. Each tooth had to be uniform, perfectly spaced, and precisely angled to mesh smoothly with its counterpart. This was a painstaking process, demanding extreme patience and an unwavering eye for detail. Any burr, any slight deviation could lead to friction, wear, and ultimately, inaccuracy. The motivations of the 18th century clockmakers were as intricate and layered as the mechanisms they crafted. For some, it was undoubtedly a pursuit of scientific understanding, a desire to harness the immutable laws of physics to create something truly precise and reliable. In an age increasingly defined by empirical observation and rational thought, the clock served as a tangible manifestation of these ideals. To create a machine that could accurately measure the passage of moments, mirroring the cosmic ballet of planets and stars, was a profound intellectual challenge. It was a form of applied philosophy, where abstract concepts of time and motion were rendered concrete through brass and steel. Consider Henry Sully, an English clockmaker who spent much of his career in France. His relentless quest for accurate marine timekeepers, though ultimately overshadowed by Harrison, was driven by a deep scientific curiosity.
He engaged with the leading astronomers and mathematicians of his day, understanding that the problem of longitude was not just a mechanical one, but a celestial one. His detailed drawings and meticulous notes reveal a mind deeply engaged with the theoretical underpinnings of his craft, not merely its practical application. He corresponded with the likes of the French Royal Academy of Sciences, eager to share his findings and contribute to the collective pool of knowledge. This was not a solitary genius working in a vacuum. It was part of a larger, global conversation among like-minded individuals, all striving for a deeper understanding of the universe, one precise tick at a time. Then there was the economic imperative. As global trade expanded, accurate timekeeping became indispensable. Ships needed to know their exact longitude to navigate safely across vast oceans, avoiding treacherous coastlines and optimizing routes. The lack of precise timekeeping led to countless shipwrecks and immense financial losses. Governments, particularly the British with its vast maritime empire, offered substantial rewards for a practical solution to the longitude problem. While John Harrison ultimately claimed the largest prize, the competition spurred innovation across the entire industry. Every watchmaker, from the Grand Masters to the humble provincial craftsman, was, in some small way, contributing to this grand economic and navigational challenge. The demand for reliable clocks and watches for both marine and domestic use meant that a skilled clockmaker could command a respectable living, even achieve considerable wealth and social standing. This was a trade that provided not just artistic satisfaction but also financial security in a rapidly changing world. However, beyond the scientific and economic drivers lay a deeply personal motivation, the pursuit of perfection itself. For many clockmakers, their craft was an obsession, relentless drive to create something flawless, something that would transcend their own fleeting existence. Each gear cut, each pivot polished, each spring coiled, was an act of profound dedication. This wasn't merely about producing a functional object, it was about creating a legacy, a testament to their skill and artistry. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of completing a complex mechanism, winding it for the first time, and hearing that steady, rhythmic tick-tock, knowing that every component had been painstakingly crafted and perfectly assembled by your own hands. This silent language of gears and springs, humming with unseen energy, was a source of immense pride and fulfillment. Consider the notion of longevity. Unlike many manufactured goods of the era, a well-made clock was designed to last for generations, often centuries. A clockmaker's work might outlive them by a factor of 10 or more, continuing to mark the passage of time for their descendants, their community, and even for future historians. This concept of creating something enduring, something that defied the ephemeral nature of human life, lent a deeper meaning to their meticulous labor. It was a quiet rebellion against the transient, a tangible anchor in the relentless flow of time. The daily routine in an 18th century clockmaker's workshop was a study in methodical discipline. The day would begin early, often before dawn, to take advantage of natural light, which was crucial for such fine work. The workshop would typically be a single room, often attached to the clockmaker's home, filled with specialized benches, vices, and an array of hand tools. Silence would often prevail, broken only by the gentle hum of lathes, the rasp of files, or the occasional tap of a hammer on brass. Conversation, when it occurred, would be hushed, focused on the technical challenges at hand. The training of an apprentice was a long and arduous process, typically 7 years, mirroring the traditional guild system. During this time, the apprentice would gradually progress from simple tasks to increasingly complex ones, slowly mastering the myriad skills required. They would learn not just the mechanics, but also rudimentary metallurgy, basic mathematics, and even artistic skills for dial engraving and case design. This was an all-encompassing education, designed to mold a complete craftsman capable of designing, building, and repairing intricate timepieces from scratch. This extended period of apprenticeship fostered a deep understanding of every aspect of the craft, instilling the patience and discipline necessary for such exacting work. The relationship between master and apprentice was often akin to that of a father and son,
with a master responsible not only for vocational training but also for the moral and ethical development of his charge. Apprentices lived with the master's family, sharing meals and daily life. This close-knit environment further reinforced the values of precision, honesty, and dedication to the craft. The reputation of the master was directly tied to the quality of his apprentices, making it imperative that they were thoroughly trained. Outside the workshop, the clockmaker might also be a valued member of the community. They were often responsible for maintaining public clocks, such as those in church steeples or town halls. This role carried significant social responsibility, as the public clock was the primary means of timekeeping for most citizens. A broken or inaccurate public clock could disrupt markets, religious services, and daily routines, making the clockmaker's expertise essential. They were the silent guardians of temporal order, their work woven into the very fabric of communal life. The clientele for these timepieces varied widely. While the most intricate and expensive clocks and watches were commissioned by the aristocracy and wealthy merchants, a growing middle class also sought more affordable, yet still reliable, timekeepers. This growing demand fueled further innovation and specialization within the industry. Some workshops specialized in movement production, others in case-making, and still others in dial engraving. This division of labor, while nascent, allowed for greater efficiency and specialization of skills, pushing the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. Yet, despite the meticulous attention to detail and the profound impact of their work, the clockmakers themselves often remained in the background, their names less celebrated than the philosophers, artists, or military heroes of their age. Their creations, however, endured, silent testaments to a quiet revolution. They transformed time from an abstract, fluid concept into a tangible, measurable entity, laying the groundwork for the modern, industrialized world. But how did these humble artisans, working with hand tools and limited scientific understanding, manage to achieve such astonishing levels of precision, sometimes reaching accuracies comparable to modern mechanical movements? What were the hidden techniques and secret knowledge passed down through generations that allowed them to literally capture and calibrate the very essence of time? The astonishing precision achieved by 18th century clockmakers, often with what we would now consider rudimentary tools and limited scientific understanding, was not born of magic, but of a profound blend of empirical observation, iterative refinement, and a deep, almost intuitive, understanding of mechanical principles. Much of this secret knowledge wasn't codified in textbooks, but was passed down through generations of masters and apprentices, a silent language spoken through demonstration and direct experience. One of the most critical elements was the meticulous hand finishing of every single component. Imagine a watchmaker painstakingly polishing the pivots of a gear train to a mirror finish. This wasn't merely for aesthetics. It drastically reduced friction, allowing the delicate mechanism to operate with minimal energy loss and maximum consistency. Any microscopic burr or rough spot would introduce drag, causing inaccuracies over time. The same applied to the teeth of gears. Each tooth was often individually shaped and polished to ensure perfect meshing, preventing backlash and wear. This level of manual dexterity and attention to detail is almost unfathomable in our age of mass production and automated precision. Then there was the art of material selection and treatment. Clockmakers had an intimate knowledge of brass, steel, and other metals. They understood how different alloys would respond to heat, how to temper steel springs to achieve optimal elasticity without brittleness, and how to work with brass to prevent warping. This knowledge was often gained through years of trial and error, shared within small, tightly knit communities of craftsmen. For instance, the exact recipe and process for making a perfectly tempered hairspring, the tiny, coiled spring that regulates the balance wheel in a watch, was a closely guarded secret, a result of countless experiments to find the ideal balance of strength and flexibility. The development of specialized tools, though often simple in appearance, was also key. While they lacked the powered machinery of later eras, 18th century workshops housed an array of purpose-built hand tools, many of which were crafted by the clockmakers themselves. A custom-made file for a specific curve, a unique reamer for a precise bore, or a bespoke cutting engine for intricate gear teeth. These were extensions of the craftsman's own hand and eye. The invention and refinement of these tools represented a continuous process of innovation within the craft, allowing for greater levels of consistency and accuracy. The very design of these tools often embodied sophisticated geometric principles, enabling the replication of precise angles and dimensions without complex measurement devices. The escapement, as mentioned, was the heart of any timekeeping mechanism, and its perfection was a constant pursuit. The development of the deadbeat escapement by George Graham in the early 18th century, which significantly reduced recoil and improved timekeeping accuracy, was a monumental leap. But it wasn't enough to simply have the design. The execution had to be flawless. This involved incredibly precise cutting of the escape wheel's teeth and meticulous adjustment of the pallets that interacted with it. Even microscopic variations could throw off the rhythm. Clockmakers would spend hours, sometimes days, making tiny adjustments, listening intently to the tick-tock, until the beat was perfectly even and rhythmic. It was a process of empirical tuning, akin to a musician tuning an instrument by ear. Furthermore, clockmakers often created their own testing environments. They might have a specific corner of the workshop with a stable temperature, or a system of weights and levers to test the consistent power delivery of a mainspring. For marine chronometers, the ultimate test was the cruel, unpredictable environment of the open sea. John Harrison's relentless iterations on his chronometers, adapting them to withstand temperature changes, humidity, and the constant motion of a ship, exemplify this dedication to real-world performance. He wasn't just designing a mechanism. He was designing a survivor, a timekeeper that could maintain its precision against overwhelming odds. His solution included sophisticated temperature compensation mechanisms, using bimetallic strips that expanded and contracted at different rates to counteract the effects of heat and cold on the balance spring. The culmination of these quiet innovations and relentless dedication led to timepieces that were astonishingly accurate for their era. While a well-made 18th-century clock might drift by a few minutes a month, a top-tier marine chronometer, like Harrison's H4, could maintain accuracy within a few seconds a day, a truly revolutionary feat. This level of precision, achieved long before the Industrial Revolution truly took hold, laid the intellectual and practical groundwork for future technological advancements. The impact of these silent artisans on history is profound, even if their names aren't always etched into the grand narratives. They didn't lead armies or sign treaties, but they provided the fundamental tool, accurate time, without which much of the modern world would simply not function. Consider the Industrial Revolution that gathered momentum in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Factories, with their complex machinery and shift workers, relied utterly on synchronized time. How could a factory operate efficiently if its workers arrived and departed on their own arbitrary schedules? How could different stages of a manufacturing process be coordinated without precise timing? The reliable, affordable timepieces produced by clockmakers enabled this new era of coordinated labor and mass production. They transformed the abstract concept of work time into a measurable, manageable resource. Beyond industry, accurate timekeeping transformed science and exploration. Astronomers could more precisely plot celestial movements, vital for navigation and understanding the universe. Explorers could map new territories with unprecedented accuracy, literally drawing the world with greater fidelity. The ability to precisely measure elapsed time allowed for more rigorous scientific experimentation, laying the groundwork for fields like physics and chemistry. Even in daily life, the subtle shift was immense. Public clocks, maintained by local clockmakers, became anchors for community life, regulating markets, religious services, and social gatherings. Personal watches, once luxuries, slowly became more accessible, empowering individuals to manage their own schedules, leading to a more ordered and predictable society. The very rhythm of life began to accelerate, driven by the relentless, precise tick-tock. The quiet world of the 18th-century clockmakers, therefore, was not merely about crafting beautiful objects. It was about forging the very framework of modernity. Their pursuit of mechanical perfection,
Their dedication to unseen details and their unwavering patience in the face of immense complexity allowed humanity to master time itself. They were the silent architects of the temporal landscape we inhabit today, where every minute is accounted for and every second counts. Their legacy reminds us that even the most boring details, meticulously pursued, can have the most profound and lasting impact on the course of human history. The rhythms of the earth. Imagine, if you will, stepping out of your modest, wattle and daub hut at dawn in a small, medieval village, somewhere in, say, 12th century England or France. The air is cool, perhaps a little damp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from your hearth and the rich, earthy aroma of the fields. Your world, unlike our own, is defined not by the constant hum of machinery or the glow of screens, but by the relentless, cyclical rhythms of the sun, the seasons, and the demanding, yet life-sustaining, earth. This is the life of a medieval peasant, a life often romanticized or, conversely, dismissed as brutish and short. Yet, delve a little deeper, and you find a world of subtle complexities, unexpected resilience, and a profound connection to the land that sustained them. The vast majority of people in medieval Europe were peasants, bound by tradition and circumstance to the land they worked. Their existence was intrinsically tied to agriculture, a constant negotiation with nature's whims. Unlike the modern farmer with tractors, scientific fertilizers, and weather forecasts, the medieval peasant relied on generations of inherited knowledge, keen observation of their environment, and sheer physical labor. Their day began before sunrise and ended well after sunset, dictated by the immediate needs of the crops and livestock. Their dwelling, a simple, single-room structure shared with family and sometimes even a few animals, was an exercise in practical design. Walls were typically made of wattle and daub, a lattice of interwoven wooden strips, wattle, coated with a mixture of clay, sand, straw, and animal dung, daub, offering surprisingly good insulation. The roof would be thatched with straw or reeds, providing a waterproof, albeit sometimes drafty, covering. A central hearth, often without a chimney, allowed smoke to escape through a hole in the roof, blackening the interior but providing warmth and a place to cook. Furniture was sparse, a crude table, wooden stools, perhaps a simple bed frame filled with straw or leaves. Comfort was a luxury, but practicality was paramount. The peasant's wardrobe was equally utilitarian. Simple tunics made of coarse wool or linen, dyed with natural pigments if at all, often cinched at the waist. Footwear, if any, would be rudimentary leather shoes or wooden clogs. Clothing was mended repeatedly until it was beyond repair, a testament to the value of every thread. Life was about resourcefulness, about making do with what was available, and about extracting every last bit of utility from every possession. Their diet was a monotonous, but often surprisingly nutritious affair, centered around cereals. Bread, often made from coarser grains like rye or barley, was the staple, supplemented by porridge or pottage, a thick stew of grains, vegetables, and sometimes legumes. Meat was a rare luxury, usually reserved for feast days or after a successful hunt, though hunting rights were often restricted to the nobility. Dairy products, such as cheese and curds, provided vital protein, and eggs were gathered when hens laid. Vegetables were grown in small garden plots attached to their huts. Cabbage, onions, peas, and beans formed the backbone of their diet. Foraging in the surrounding forests for berries, nuts, and wild greens supplemented their meager provisions, especially during lean times. Water would be drawn from a communal well or a nearby stream, its purity a constant, unspoken gamble. The agricultural year dictated everything. Spring was a time of immense labor, plowing the fields, often with oxen pulling a heavy wooden plow and sowing seeds by hand. The medieval plow, while seemingly simple, was a marvel of its time, turning over heavy soil to expose fresh earth. Summer brought the urgent task of weeding, a backbreaking effort to protect the nascent crops from competition. Late summer and early autumn culminated in the most critical period, the harvest. Entire families, from the very young to the very old, would toil in the fields, cutting grain with sickles,
binding sheaves, and threshing the yield. A bad harvest could mean starvation, making this period one of intense anxiety and communal effort. Winter, while seemingly a time of rest, was still productive. It was when tools were mended, clothes were spun and woven, and animals slaughtered for meat, which would then be preserved through salting or smoking. Social gatherings were more common in winter, offering a reprieve from the relentless outdoor labor. Despite the harsh realities, community was a cornerstone of medieval peasant life. Villages were tight-knit units where mutual aid was essential for survival. Neighbors helped each other with the harvest, shared tools, and offered comfort in times of hardship. The church, often the most imposing building in the village, served as a spiritual center, a social hub, and a source of both solace and rigid social order. Life expectancy was undeniably lower than today, and disease was a constant threat. Child mortality was tragically high. However, it's a mistake to view their lives as purely miserable. There were moments of joy, celebration, and deep human connection. Feasts, religious holidays, and local festivals provided much-needed breaks from labor, filled with simple entertainments like storytelling, music, and communal dances. Life was hard, but it was lived with a profound awareness of nature's power and the strength of human community. The medieval peasant was a master of their environment, possessing an encyclopedic knowledge of local flora and fauna, weather patterns, and soil conditions. Their survival depended on this intimate understanding. They were, in essence, practical ecologists, constantly adapting their methods to the specific demands of their immediate surroundings. Their world was small, but it was intensely understood. Yet, despite their tireless efforts and their vital role in sustaining society, the medieval peasant existed at the bottom of a rigid social hierarchy. They were bound, in most cases, to the land and to a lord, owing him labor, rents, and loyalty. Their lives, while seemingly simple, were entangled in a complex web of feudal obligations and customary laws that shaped every aspect of their existence. But what exactly were these obligations, and how did they truly define the boundaries of a medieval peasant's world? The slow unraveling and the seeds of change. The seemingly unyielding edifice of feudalism, which had defined the lives of medieval peasants for centuries, did not simply collapse overnight. Instead, it experienced a long, drawn-out process of slow unraveling, influenced by a confluence of demographic shifts, economic innovations, and social upheavals that gradually eroded its foundations. The story of its decline is not one of dramatic revolution by the downtrodden, but rather a subtle accumulation of pressures that, over time, transformed the very nature of the peasant's existence. One of the most significant catalysts for change was the devastating demographic impact of the Black Death in the mid-14th century. This catastrophic plague wiped out an estimated one-third to half of Europe's population. While horrific in its immediate effects, its long-term consequence was a profound shift in the balance of power between lords and peasants. With drastically fewer laborers available, surviving peasants found themselves in an unprecedented position of leverage. Land, once scarce, became abundant, and workers, once plentiful, became a valuable commodity. Lords, desperate to find people to work their land and ensure their harvests, were forced to offer more attractive terms. Wages for agricultural labor increased significantly, and the strict feudal obligations began to loosen. Some lords offered cash rents in place of labor service, allowing peasants more autonomy over their time. Others were compelled to grant greater freedoms, sometimes even selling outright freedom to serfs eager to escape their bound status. This newfound bargaining power, though born of immense tragedy, was a critical crack in the feudal system. The constant, unspoken threat of peasants simply abandoning one manor for another that offered better terms forced lords to adapt or face ruin. Concurrent with the demographic shift was the gradual growth of a money economy. While bartering and payment in kind had long been central to medieval life, the expansion of trade networks, the rise of towns, and the increasing circulation of coinage slowly introduced a more liquid economic system. Peasants,
earning cash for their surplus produce at local markets or for their labor, could now buy goods and services they once had to produce themselves or acquire through bartering. This gave them a degree of economic independence previously unimaginable. Cash rents became more common, and for a peasant, paying a fixed sum of money was often preferable to the unpredictable burden of labor service, especially as their own lands became more productive. The rise of towns and cities also played a crucial role. These urban centers, often independent of direct feudal control, offered new opportunities beyond agriculture. A serf who could escape to a town and live there for a year and a day without being recaptured could often gain their freedom. This provided an escape valve from the constraints of the manor, drawing ambitious or desperate peasants away from the land. While urban life had its own hardships, it promised a different kind of existence, one where personal labor might be directly compensated and where social mobility, however limited, was possible. The growing demand for food and raw materials from these urban centers also stimulated agricultural production and created new markets for peasant produce, further integrating them into a wider economic sphere. Moreover, instances of peasant revolts, though rare and often brutally suppressed, served as stark reminders to the nobility that there were limits to exploitation. Uprisings like the Jacquerie in France, 1358, or the Peasants' Revolt in England, 1381, demonstrated a collective will to resist oppressive conditions, even if the immediate outcomes were tragic for the rebels. While these revolts did not dismantle feudalism directly, they certainly contributed to a slow reevaluation of the peasant's role and the sustainability of overly burdensome demands. The memory of these revolts lingered, shaping the caution with which some lords approached their tenants. Over the long term, these factors contributed to the slow, steady decline of serfdom and the transformation of the medieval peasant into a more independent tenant farmer or, increasingly, a wage laborer. While tenant farmers still paid rent, they generally had more freedom over their land and their labor than their serf ancestors. They might sign leases, giving them legal standing, and could even sell their surplus to accumulate some wealth. The bond to the land became economic rather than strictly personal. The final demise of feudalism wasn't a single event, but a gradual evolution, stretching over centuries, marked by localized variations and resistances. By the early modern period, while vestiges of the old system remained, the dominant form of agricultural labor in much of Western Europe had shifted away from widespread serfdom towards tenancy and wage labor. This fundamental transformation laid the groundwork for the agrarian revolutions and subsequent industrialization that would further reshape society. The medieval peasant, whose life was so deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the earth and the weight of feudal obligations, ultimately became an agent of change, albeit a silent and often unwitting one. Their sheer numbers, their resilience in the face of hardship, and their quiet pursuit of survival ultimately put pressure on a system that could no longer sustain itself in the face of changing demographics and economic realities. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not solely shaped by kings and battles, but by the slow, enduring persistence of ordinary lives. What seemingly small or overlooked innovations in daily life might have profoundly altered human existence, much like the changing status of the medieval peasant. The chains of custom and the weight of obligations. The life of a medieval peasant, while deeply connected to the earth, was also inextricably bound by a complex web of feudal obligations. This system, often depicted as a rigid pyramid with the monarch at the apex and the peasants at the base, was in reality a multifaceted arrangement of reciprocal duties and rights, albeit heavily skewed in favor of the lord. To understand the surprisingly complex life of the peasant, one must first grasp the pervasive influence of these customary laws and traditions that governed nearly every waking moment. At the heart of the peasant's unfreedom was the concept of serfdom, a condition distinct from slavery, but equally binding. A serf was not owned outright by the lord, but they were tied to the land, the manor or fief, on which they lived and worked. They could not leave the manor without the lord's permission, and if the land was sold, the serfs living on it were transferred with it. This attachment to the soil meant that their very existence was defined by the boundaries of a lord's domain. Their identity was rooted in their village, their fields, and their place within the manorial system. The most visible obligation was labor service, often referred to as corvée. Peasants were typically required to work a certain number of days each week on the lord's domain, the land directly managed by the lord for his own benefit. This could involve plowing, sowing, harvesting, ditch digging, fence mending, or any other task the lord deemed necessary. These days, often 2 or 3 per week, were paramount, taking precedence over work on their own strips of land. Imagine the frustration. Your own small plot of barley is ripe for harvest, but you must first dedicate precious sunlight and energy to the Lord's fields. This labor was performed without direct pay, considered part of the rent for living on the Lord's land and receiving his theoretical protection. Beyond regular labor service, there were boon days, extra days of compulsory labor during peak agricultural periods like harvest. During these crucial times, the entire village workforce might be mobilized for the Lord's benefit, working from dawn till dusk. While the Lord might provide some food and ale on these days, the underlying reality was that the peasants' primary allegiance of labor was to the manor, not to their own survival. A poor harvest on the Lord's domain would impact the Lord's revenue. A poor harvest on the peasant's own strip could mean starvation for their family. In addition to labor, peasants owed rents, which could be paid in various forms. While some eventually paid in coin as the monetary economy developed, earlier and often more common forms of rent involved payment in kind. This meant a portion of their own harvest, perhaps a certain measure of grain, a number of chickens, or a specific amount of eggs, would be given to the Lord. This tithe of their own hard-won produce represented a significant portion of their meager yield, a constant reminder of their subordinate position. Imagine the calculation. Every grain reaped was not solely for your family's sustenance, but also for the Lord's coffers. Then there were the feudal dues and fines, a bewildering array of payments and obligations that punctuated the peasant's life. The marriage fine, merchet, was often required when a peasant's daughter married outside the manor, as the Lord was effectively losing a potential laborer and a source of future lineage. The heriot was a death duty, where the Lord could claim the best beast or chattel of a deceased tenant. This was a particularly harsh blow to a grieving family, as it stripped them of valuable assets precisely when they were most vulnerable. The tallage was a tax that the Lord could levy at will, ostensibly for his own needs, but often seen as an arbitrary imposition. Peasants were also often required to use the Lord's facilities, the Lord's mill to grind their grain, the Lord's oven to bake their bread, and the Lord's winepress, for which they had to pay a fee, either in kind or in coin. These monopolies, known as banalities, further constrained their economic independence and ensured the Lord profited from every aspect of their daily existence. These obligations were enforced through the manorial court, presided over by the Lord or his steward. This was the primary legal system for peasants, dealing with disputes over land, broken agreements, minor crimes, and, crucially, the enforcement of feudal dues. While it offered a semblance of order and dispute resolution, it was fundamentally biased in favor of the Lord. The peasant had little recourse against an unjust ruling, though outright tyranny by a lord could sometimes lead to peasant revolts, which, while often brutally suppressed, indicate that there were limits to what even a lord could impose. Despite these heavy burdens, peasants did possess some rights, though these were customary rather than codified. They had the right to cultivate their strips of land, to graze their animals on common pastures, and to collect firewood from the Lord's woods. These rights were crucial for their survival and were often fiercely defended, not through formal legal battles, but through generations of established tradition and the collective memory of the village. The shared understanding of how things ought to be provided a fragile bulwark against complete exploitation. The peasant's life was also profoundly shaped by the agricultural calendar and the unpredictable nature of the climate. A prolonged drought, excessive rain, or an early frost could decimate crops, leading to widespread famine. In such times, the feudal obligations became even more crushing. While a benevolent lord might offer some temporary relief, the system itself offered little built-in safety net. Survival was a testament to communal resilience, shared labor, mutual support,
and the deep-seated knowledge of subsistence farming. This intricate dance between obligation and survival, between the lord's demands and the peasant's sheer willpower, defined much of medieval life. The peasant was not a free agent. Their choices were severely circumscribed. Yet, within these constraints, they cultivated a unique culture, a shared identity forged in the fields and reinforced by the communal rhythms of village life. Their existence was a constant negotiation with authority, nature, and the limits of their own bodies. But how did this seemingly rigid and oppressive system, built on the physical labor of the many for the benefit of the few, ever come to an end, slowly giving way to new forms of societal organization? What were the cracks that eventually appeared in the seemingly unyielding edifice of feudalism?